So, wow. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to my Facebook channel. After yesterday's pretty intense experiences that I'll say, I definitely was feeling everything around them the day before. And so, yeah, yesterday was pretty intense. And I was up all night listening to some people on other channels talk about what's pending. And then I also listened to another channel that was covering the stories of the pending storm making landfall and all of that. And obviously we know if it happens once, it can happen again. But people have been comfortable with it happening, but not realizing that it will get more extreme as time marches on. What do you mean get more extreme? Well, we already heard about we already know about like those hurricanes way back in the 1980s, 90s, 2000s. And so it's like nothing to some people. Oh, I've lived through all these Florida hurricanes, no big deal. You just deal with it and then you just move on. Well, that's a conditioning process. When you let your guard down, once you realize what's going on and you think that, okay, this is, no big deal, and you let your guard down, you don't realize that even though back then when there were very strong hurricanes, it wasn't going to totally take out, different places to the point where you couldn't do commerce or anything. There wasn't that agenda, that intention yet to reconfigure the landscape and potentially even realize the future maps, the future Navy maps of the U.S. Okay, so it was like back in the 80s when I saw the storms and felt the storms in the 80s, and I was scared shitless, absolutely. I mean, when you remember those and you're like, okay, well, that's just a storm that happened over there in California. I've been through some pretty crazy storms. You're like, oh yeah, it's not a big deal. We'll just deal with it. But if you look now, back then, that was a conditioning process for everybody. And of course, the conditioning process to feel sick around different climate changes, like spring and summer and fall and winter. And so people are comfortable with catastrophic devastation. They're okay with feeling and seeing and experiencing catastrophe. And then when the conspiracy world, which was the baby of the 1960s, I mean, that's what we have been covering the last 20 years, who's we, the conspiracy world. We have been activated to warn people through the means of fear, through the means of, oh my gosh, conspiracy, through the means of uncovering different truths. And even though we were mocked by even the mainstream who activated us, okay, it was still a conditioning that even though you didn't believe it, it was out there. Just like the whole immortality and biophysical immortality, it was never spoken until we spoke about it in the J world. That you didn't have to die from cancer, disease, and chronic illness or old age. And until someone speaks it, it doesn't exist. So as soon as you speak something into existence, then it makes you question and cock your head to then consider what the other arguments surrounding that specific claim or idea. And so yesterday was pretty intense in what I see where we're going, or where we've been going. And even last year was obviously with Fort Myers and the 15-foot storm surges. But, that was last year, right? Now we're in this year. Now, last year, July, was when the CERN got turned on, and it was more aggressive in the climate change. The atmosphere changed even more so. And so, yeah, storms were getting stronger. Even the weathermen on Fox and CNN and any other of those, local stations, they're realizing how intense the rains are and the storms are. So, and of course, they have the climate change argument, which then can be perceived as man-made. But what kind of man-made? Was it intentional by the military, or was it because some guy down the street was watering his garden? Okay, you can pick and choose your own adventure, but no matter what, climate change is whatever it is you want it to be. It's here and it's happening. And just because some of you do not get devastated like others in the crook of the bend of Florida does not mean that you will not be next on some level. Don't let your guard down. And then also this whole thing with non-compliance. Wow. So now, and after participating in the fear of masks a couple years ago, the fear of the V's, absolutely, because we had to figure out, you know, whose fault, what fault it was for why people are sick, realizing that it's the climate change that is causing people's sicknesses. And of course, the different viral gain of function experiments do get activated, but if it wasn't for the climate change, they wouldn't get activated to such an extent. But then people already have predisposed issues. And so then this whole thing of non-compliance, which means that that they say they mandate something where it's a rule of law that you disobey the laws. Okay, well, there is no rule or law as far as federal law and even state law that you have to wear a mask or get a V. It is a personal or company requirement. And it could be even if you walk into a city hall and they're like, you have to wear a mask, you got to wear a fucking mask, or don't go to city hall, call them. Don't go into the building. Okay, because that's a place of business and they have their rules and regulations. So this whole thing of non-compliance just doesn't make sense when no one is forcing anyone to do anything, and you have other choices how you want to interact with your government, with different businesses. And since now we have contactless delivery and you can call people instead of meeting with them in person, no one's forcing anyone to do anything. So this whole non-compliance bullshit, it's like a conditioning people to then disobey every recommendation from the government because you already have a predisposed thought process that anything the government says should be disobeyed, should be completely ignored, and never take the recommendations. I mean, when they say mandatory or voluntary evacuations out there in Florida, and people are like, I'm going to sit it out. I've been through all these different hurricanes for the last 20 years and I survived them all. So what, and not realizing that it's going to be even more frequent. That's the thing people don't realize. Things that were happening, maybe there's 5 years, 2 years, or every couple years in between each devastation. Now it'd be more frequent, just like the frequencies are more frequent. What do you mean by more frequent? They're a little bit more aggressive. The storms are aggressive, the rain's more aggressive, the lightning is more aggressive, the heat is more aggressive, the cold will be more aggressive. Now, those that are not under the fucking influence know how aggressive shit is. But if you're under the influence, and what does that mean? You're under a prescription drug, you're under cannabis, you're under alcohol, you're not going to know the difference. You're not going to tell the difference. And so to you, when someone says things are more aggressive, you need to watch out. You're like, oh, you're just brainwashed. You're complying with the government. You're this, you're that. Blah, blah. And I'm like, if I was in Florida, which I would not be now, but if I was in Florida and they recommended an evacuation, especially like Cedar Key or Horseshoe Island or any of those places that were underwater, I would have gotten the fuck out way before. I wouldn't even be living there, actually. I wouldn't even be living there. But if you're waiting for the government to say, hey, please evacuate, we are recommending mass evacuation, get the fuck out. Oh, but that's right. We have non-compliant people. Because they're perceiving the government is forcing them to take a V. They're perceiving the government is forcing them to wear a mask. You are perceiving you have no other choices but what the government is recommending. That's how much the conditioning in the conspiracy world, in the non-compliance anti-V world, has fucked up people and fucked up their children. Because then when there is an actual recommendation to save your fucking life, you won't recognize that some of these recommendations from the government are trying to save your fucking life. And then you're like, nope, I'm going to be non-compliant. And then you are standing right there in harm's way. So some of you who are all into non-compliance, when you're under 9 feet of water, non-compliance is moot. And this is way back before the storm even happened. When people are literally fighting for their life in these future storm surges, your activism comes off as disrespectful and you come off as completely oblivious to the world you live in. Can both worlds exist simultaneously? If you can acknowledge that non-compliance may not save people, and right now some people have larger fish to fucking fry, and acknowledge that, and maybe they should have complied to leave the town, that could be potentially underwater, then maybe you could, play that game of non-compliance. Well, I choose not to comply, but my non-compliance ain't going to save your fucking life. When you're saying, oh, don't comply to get a V into some job that you choose to be in. When you're like, oh, I'm not going to comply to wear a mask in areas that they require for personal reasons at some of the grocery stores. When you have another choice, if you can acknowledge that what your non-compliance is not going to save anyone else, not even fucking you, then you can play that game. But then why would people even say it when they think that it doesn't hold no water? No, they think their non-compliance holds water. It holds no fucking water. It holds no fucking water. And some people wanted to resist or respond to this. And so I said, if you must respond to this with an opposite thought process, maybe you resemble that post. Okay? Someone tried to sort of like say, well, the Floridians have been well seasoned in this. No. Okay, you've been in the conspiracy world. Maybe not the full, maybe you only were in the anti-V world and that's it. But if you have been in the conspiracy world, you know how bad shit's gonna fucking get. You know how bad it's gonna get, because it's been getting bad, pretty bad at least the last 3 years. But if you can't convert people and you can't change people, Jillian, and people are gonna do what they're doing, they're so oblivious and they're not, then why are you even doing it? This is for my own personal releasing the stress. This is me taking care of myself, expressing myself, because all of you are a mirror of me. I'm watching myself making choices I wouldn't make, but I'm not trying to convert you. I'm just relieving my stress. I'm getting it out there. I am called self-expressing. That's it. I have no expectation any of you fucking listen to me. But I have a venue to speak my mind without harming anyone, without trying to convert anyone, and without coming off as intolerant and discriminatory. And I'm honing in on my skills on how to speak without coming from the point of, I want to convert you, you're bad, you're wrong, you're this, you're that. No, some people need somebody else to give them another option, to give them, yes, to provide them another opportunity to think in a different way. Just like people have given me all their opinions about what I'm doing or what I've been doing the last 7 years, and I've graciously, sort of, taken on their recommendations or at least consider their thought processes. But knowing where they came from, I don't consider them too seriously, because they're coming from the point of death, destruction, and remedy, and everyone's supposed to die someday. So even though I still consider your thought process, doesn't mean I'm going to take your advice, because we both have different outcomes, or both want to have different outcomes, different intentions, different outcomes. You expect to die. Some of you expect to die, so that's fine. I don't expect to die, and I will fight for my life. And if you give me recommendations and or, your thought process, well, if you expect to die someday, I can't take you seriously, because you don't care how you're going to end up. And that's what I've been facing the last 7 years, is that people don't care where they end up, but they have no problem giving me their fucking peace of mind about how I should say things and do things. And even telling me, oh, you're not supposed to say that, you can live indefinitely. That's not allowed. You're not allowed to have a different thought process. You're not allowed to evolve, Jillian. You're allowed to only pass away in the manner it's intended in the medical holistic energy healing world. And I'm saying, no, I'm not. I don't have to. Okay? But I do this purely for my own personal and professional development. That's it. And you get the benefit of it. And so then I said, I'm a fearmonger, and I'm proud of it. I'm your fucking immune system. You keep ignoring daily because you're under the fucking influence. I've been in this information longer than some of you even thought about it. So yeah, I'm proud to be a person who fearmongers. And I don't care if you think I have some financial incentive around it. You determine how you receive my information and make up whatever story you want about what I'm doing and why. But remember, I've sold at least 3 books. In the beginning, I was selling membership and a book, and I made some okay money to then reinvest back into my company, to reinvest back into my evolution, to put out another book, of which there was no ebook, there was only a paper book. And then this last book that I wrote, I have somewhere, has an ebook attached to it for those who invested so heavily into me the last 3 years. Now you have an ebook that's only $5 freaking, okay, that you can read and figure out where I'm coming from. So as long as you're in a relatively safe area to do it, okay? So I've put back into my company and have given back to the society and made it relatively inexpensive for you to evolve with me. And my next book won't be until like 2030. Okay? So you have now, some of you have my old books, and you have the evolution, and you have the last book that is so inexpensive that even those who are new to this information will have an inexpensive book to read. And there's other books out there available that you can see where my thought process was and where it evolved to. Okay? So I'm not getting rich off of this shit. This is for my personal development. Because the world is changing, and I'm not relying on capitalizing on saving people, because you can't sell somebody wanting to save themselves. They gotta fucking do it themselves. But my representation might encourage people to reconsider their belief systems and their thought processes and how they go about saving themselves. And there's so many options out there. Okay, I'm not the only one. And so right now, this is not the time to be toxically positive, because there's people out there who are like, oh, don't worry about the Floridian. Nah, nah, nah. Oh, I worry about so many people, not because I want to try to change them, because I'm watching myself, humanity, destroy themselves voluntarily. You can't do anything about it, but you can only get out the trauma, because it is traumatic watching people self-destruct. It's not like I live in a vacuum. I don't purposely surround myself by homogenized people. Do I run a group with the J world? No, because most people in the J world don't even understand where the fuck I'm coming from. Maybe a handful do. So then when you're faced with trauma, just watching what could happen to someone who's not even aware, watching what people do to themselves daily, that's traumatic. You got to get it out and put out your thought process that could be opposite, that will neutralize whatever evolution that could destroy you, and then give somebody the option. And that's it. It's all physics. It's balancing out the two sides. Okay? So right now, this is not the time to be toxically positive. People literally need to be woken up. Of course, I will never go on someone's page and tell them what they should do, ever. If they're in Florida, I would never tell them they should leave. There's people in Florida, and I worry about them. People on my page, I've interacted with them. I come, a little bit close with them. We don't always agree with religion, spirituality, and even the supplement side, but I still have investment. I've spent time with them. I spent time back and forth. They've bought my ebook or bought a book. Part of me feels a little bit obligated to just worry about them because of the investment they had in me. So I'll have some investment in them. Not that I'm going to try to convert them, but I will worry about them. Okay? It's up to them if they feel they should leave. Some people need to wait until something really bad happens before they finally say, okay, it's time for me to do something different. It may come to that. It may have to come to that. I don't want it to come to that, but sometimes that's what it takes. When people are faced with crazy disease, like literally dis-ease, whether it's in the body or out there in their environment, and they have options to go somewhere, but they're just not ready. It just hasn't gotten that bad. That's what it takes even in the J world. Some people's issues are not that bad that requires them to make any changes. And that includes even where they live. It's not that bad yet. Eventually it will be, and you hope you have what it takes to be able to leave and or relocate somewhere else if it's possible. And so I will never go on someone's page and tell them what they should do, ever. If they're in Florida, I would never tell them they should leave. If someone is trying to warn someone, I will never dispute and downplay their concerns. And John says suffering is our only motivation. Yes. You can't take away people's suffering. They will have to, and that's hard even for us to watch. And John, you get it. It's tough to watch someone else's suffering, but that is the best lessons of all, because you remember the pain. When I was dealing with that heartburn and eating so much of that Jell-O on top of 3 shots of alcohol in 8 hours in a very hot, humid day, the suffering of the hives, the suffering of the heartburn, the suffering of I don't know how long this is going to happen, the suffering of throwing up all that acid because I overdid it on some things. Oh yeah, you never forget the pain of suffering, ever. And it may take people to do that, and they may not survive their suffering. But it's not for us to determine how long they should suffer, when they should take what. It's not for us to determine. If they are suffering that bad, they go to their government or they go to the medical holistic system and have the government and the medical holistic system take away their suffering. But it's not up to me or anyone else out there to take away anyone's suffering, as well as not up to me or anyone else to go on someone's page and be toxically positive because that person who is toxically positive is suffering astronomically and they don't want to feel the suffering. And so when someone tries to downplay my fears, they're either under the influence or they have chosen not to face the pain of their own body, mind, and spirit. And they can't even see that translate out in somebody else who is warning people, even themselves, of the impending danger, such as a storm that was strong as what it was. Okay? And we're gonna be seeing a lot of this. I mean, as far as the storms and things that are coming out of nowhere that people are gonna be suffering from. The Gulf Coast, you guys are in the crosshairs. You have to realize this, whether it's New Orleans or anywhere on the Gulf Coast, Texas, Alabama, because there's Dauphin Island. I went to Dauphin Island, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida. All right. These are some areas that you got to know that you're in the crosshairs. How much are you going to suffer to stay there? And since we don't know how frequent and what their time frame is to chip away at the coastlines, as you can see, the storms were so strong at the coastline and they tapered off a little bit as they went inland. And then you can imagine they're saying it's going to be a long road to recovery. And that was only just one storm this season. We're at up to November 30th when hurricane season's over. If someone's trying to warn someone, I will never dispute and downplay their concerns. That's very presumptuous and assuming that you have that kind of latitude. You are challenging them with your manipulation. Some people are out of the country. And they're like, oh yeah, don't worry about them, Floridians. And they're out of the country, out of harm's way, somewhere off in Europe. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, how presumptuous. She can downplay situations because she's far away from the situation. No, I'm not playing that game. I was suffering along with all of y'all yesterday. And I didn't even do a Facebook Live because I didn't want to go and be like, oh, shame, shame, shame. You guys are there. Now you got to suffer. Now I'm just like, fuck, watching some of the CNN clips, people filling sandbags and all that. And I'm like, yeah, sandbags. Sealing your house with plastic and duct tape. Water is very aggressive. Water can be very destructive. It is destructive. And so that's very presumptuous in assuming that you have that kind of latitude. You are challenging them with your manipulation. Don't fucking do it to me. I take it for a minute, but I don't tolerate for too long. Okay? I mean, if you're suffering, you don't like my information because you're suffering, that's on you. It's not me. Not for you to change me and how I express myself. You need to figure out why the fuck you have to dispute someone. And I had to figure out for myself too when I went on someone else's page. and was like, when they were like, don't fearmonger, I'm like, do you not remember California? That chick was in California when those tropical storms were coming through that was so unprecedented. And she had the gall to say on her page, which, okay, I was being presumptuous, to say don't fearmonger. And I'm like, do you not have a short memory? What the heck? And she's like, well, you should know about not developing disease because you're all health conscious, Jillian. And I'm like, yeah, called listen to indicators and get out of harm's way. Don't do more harm to yourself by staying in harm's way. What the fuck? But I did it very politely, but that's the thing. I won't do that again. I mean, I apologize for even coming on there, but wow. Yeah, I was a little bit tripped out about the whole thing that was going on. But I won't do that to somebody else. But I think karma got to me and someone else did it to me and I deserve that. But don't do it to me. I won't do it again to somebody else. Okay? So, I mean, I get it. I can acknowledge where I fucked up and someone else had to do it with me and I get it. All right? Sometimes we're all karma to each other on some level. Okay? So if you have to dispute my information because you cannot deal with the reality and you have to be toxically positive, you probably are under the influence. You're probably over the rainbow. I was going a little bit overboard there. Don't assume I will take your cues. I'm not over the rainbow and I'm not singing Kumbaya. Okay? I would rather somebody be concerned with my situation and warn me about danger that is coming. Absolutely. When I go into these weather pages and someone says, oh yeah, we're going to have a lot of heat next week, which I already saw on the weather stuff. Yeah, I appreciate the warnings on other pages that I follow. And even someone say, hey, look what's going on. Da, da, da. I'm like, holy shit. And I appreciate that because it gets me prepared for what I must do to protect myself and to be ready for something that could happen. I would rather somebody be concerned with my situation and warn me about danger that is coming than to say, oh, you'll be fine, you'll be okay because I survived something. Okay, when someone says, oh yeah, I survived a 10-foot whatever over there in some other city or state, okay, big fucking deal. So you survived. Okay, how is that even relevant? Why do we need to know why you survived? Why don't you say, hey, how could you survive this situation down there? Maybe not be there. The propensity, the statistically predictability of more frequencies of destructive storms will happen more in Florida than not. Sometimes it takes more than just one person to say something. It could take a bunch of people to say something to somebody and they move or get out of harm's way. Some people just don't have the means to. Other people, maybe it takes a few different people to say the same thing. I don't know. But why not? Why not be the one? You don't ram your information on someone else's throat, but on public pages, if someone says, well, I don't know if I should leave or not, and you have people saying maybe you should leave, but they're like, well, I have an elderly mother that I'm taking care of, and she can't be moved, really. And then you're like, well, she's trying to figure out if it's worth it, and there's no way to know how bad things are going to get. But why gamble? That's the thing I'm saying. Why gamble? Not in this time. You never gamble against yourself. Gamble for yourself and get the fuck out. But again, if you're taking care of somebody, well, that's the thing. You're taking care of animals and children and pets and all this other shit. Holy crap. I wouldn't want to be in that position where you'd rather gamble against yourself and save things that are going to die anyways because that's what you already believe in. You know, I'm not going to go there, but whatever. I will never assume people have the capacity to survive conditions such as what's going on. I would never, ever tell someone to stay put. See, when you've been given the opportunity to evacuate and then that door has closed, well, they don't want you roaming the streets. Now they're like, well, stay put. Shelter in place because you didn't get out in time. I will let the government determine how they would warn the people. If anything, I would rather leave than wait for the government to tell me when to leave. Because it might be too late. When it comes to the power of Mother Nature and the weather, I don't challenge her at all. Fuck no, I don't challenge Mother Nature at all. And man, whatever man has been able to weaponize Mother Nature in so many ways. Let me count the ways. No, I don't need to count the ways. It's too many ways. So when man knows how to weaponize Mother Nature, you don't fuck with Mother Nature who has been weaponized. Now you just get out of harm's way and you listen to your government. Oh God, that's a new thing to freaking think about when we people have been resisting the government for the last 20 fucking years. So when it comes to the power of Mother Nature and the weather, I don't challenge her. I walk the fuck away. I know when I'm overpowered. Okay? I mean, somebody on my Facebook who lives out there in Cairo, Georgia, she left her house so she could be in some shelter. And she's been an anti-government for many, many years in the chemtrails world. And she actually left her house. She's smart. She's fucking smart. Because that storm is going right over through the borderline of Florida and Georgia. And she was very thankful that her house was not demolished. She was very thankful. So she knew when she was overpowered. She wasn't going to go and face Mother Nature like that. She got the hell out. Smart lady. I give her a lot of credit. We may not agree on everything, but that I thought was very commendable that she left her house. That's my advice. Know when to walk away from battles, and hurricanes are a battle through Mother Nature. And she does get help from mankind. Again, I don't tell anyone what to do on their page with anything. I give people credit when it's due, but not when it has to do with the stuff that's currently going on right now. It's okay not to be positive. It's okay to be very negative and very alarmist. If that is offensive to you, please do not read my information. If you feel compelled to keep challenging me, you have the issue. It's not for you to correct me. And I said, I politely challenged someone yesterday, and it will only be the only time, because I was feeling very emotional, okay, about what was going on and what will happen tomorrow, which was yesterday. And she did not agree with fear-mongering or warning people. And I felt compelled to say that we have enough indicators to warrant the fear and the warnings. But I will never challenge her again. Ever. That was a one-time deal. And I'm not in the habit of downplaying anybody's situation. And so we all will have to find a way to deal with the situation at hand. But please allow people to be who they are. And some of you have made it a habit of challenging me a lot. Okay, so I have to let her be who she is. That girl on the other page that I was trying to challenge. And that's difficult. No matter what, she sees that me as an alarmist is causing disease and anti-God or anti-Christ. And I see her as not being alarmed as like anti-person, anti-life. And you can't convert people that way. You can't, I'll tell you, when we're watching Facebook, you're going to see a lot of things you don't agree with. And learning how to articulate them on your Facebook, and they choose to read your information or not, that's going to be the best way for you to save yourself from so much stress building up inside. Because we are in a large scale down, and many people are not going to survive it. You know how many bodies they're going to have to find when they're doing search and rescue, recovery and rescue? And I'll get into that later about be careful of even that. Trying to stay somewhere because you don't want to follow the government orders. I mean, we hear about Alex Jones and the whole FEMA and the CAMPSs, but I would rather be around a large group of people and government officials and a bunch of people listening to the government in shelters than try to weather that storm on my own by myself when you don't know who's out there lurking. There's a human trafficker or some black ops dude or something you don't know. You don't want to be caught by yourself. You don't. And so sometimes safety is in numbers. I know I'm not like one to be like, oh, I'm going to go and weather, I'm going to be an off-gridder and weather everything by myself. Nah. You don't have the upper hand. The government has the upper hand when it comes to the weather and where safety is and when shit's going to happen. So now it's time to change that argument of being from being non-compliant and anti-government to be like, okay, know when you're outnumbered, know when you've been outsmarted. Know that. If you don't understand where you have the power, don't have the power, yeah. Now you're looking at the activists out there who are destroying themselves to death through their resistance. And some of you have made it a habit to challenge me a lot. It stops now. And if you're all about non-compliance across the board, then you have no discernment to know danger, know when danger for what it really is. And you will downplay everything the government says. And then you have shown that you're not very critically aware, that you can't be like that across the board. It's like throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Maybe change the water, not the baby, right? Maybe change why you see things the way you do versus assuming the government is all bad. And given most of you think VACCINESs are poison, that's why you hate the government. And that ideology will jade everything about the world you live in because you don't understand science or FDA approval. Okay, so the all anti-V people, they're shooting themselves in the foot, but they don't see it that way. Because remember, they are very, very, very regimented in the way they see things. They don't even realize that the world has changed. And so they're staying stuck in their regimented, unevolutionary ways, and they will resist themselves out of existence, and their poor children are subject to the same thing. They're destroying their children for doing that. And so that's their Achilles heels. They never took responsibility for the cannabis or the herbs or the operations or the prescription drugs or the psychedelics or the prescription drugs or the cannabis or the natural remedies on their bodies and their family bodies for years. And now their children and their community are paying the price for their lack of personal responsibility. And so, of course, they will downplay anything the government says, which tells them and me, you haven't learned a damn thing in my world, not a damn fucking thing. But again, I can't expect the people in the J world, everyone in the J world, to understand where I'm coming from. People will cherry pick my information. They'll take certain things and leave the rest. And so that's fine. And so, no, I don't take your non-compliance seriously at all. Because maybe certain things you need to comply so you don't end up wondering if you should have complied or not. Especially when it comes to surging water. 10 feet, 9 feet, 12 feet, or whatever it is. Sometimes it's okay to comply with your government regulations and rules and suggestions. Okay, so when you know that they are terraforming and they are reconfiguring the U.S., the West, all of this, the countries and continents or whatever that have eminent domain, and I'll go into that later again. But when you know that's what's going on through fire, fear, water, earth, and FEMA. Okay, when you actually finally come to terms that that's what's going on, that they are terraforming and they're allowing biodiversity and they're going to push people into the inner cities or cities, sanctioned human habitation zones, when you know that's what's going on, now it's incumbent upon you to figure out where it's going to be safe. Okay, so let's go back to Hawaii for a minute. Lahaina, Hawaii. Now, that's an island with rich and poor people and indigenous people. Eminent domains where the government can take the land based upon the outcome of some natural disaster that you can't prove was intentional or not. So the outcome is devastation, hazards, and unlivability, allegedly. And maybe these are people who choose not to evolve, who don't want to become part of the smart grid, who are resisting evolution and are against, whatever, and they don't want to change. And who is anyone to tell them to change, right? Well, how do you force people to change? Well, you don't force them. You have to change their environment. And then, of course, that's the whole weather stuff going on. And is that right or wrong? I couldn't tell you. I wouldn't want to be in an island. I wouldn't want to be indigenous in the West. I wouldn't want to be out there off-gridding by myself, knowing the kind of firepower and different advanced technology somebody else has when they have an intention to change the world. I wouldn't want to go up against that. So what do? I find ways to figure out how to play this game very carefully and save myself. And teach, if I had children, to teach them how to save themselves and know when to get out of harm's way and not resist and think that your non-compliant is going to save you when it actually will destroy you. And so I'm not saying that it's correct what people are, but again, in your body, you have so many trillions and trillions of colony forming units, and some are more numerous and some are more destructive and causing you torture and pain and or won't evolve, and you're trying to evolve, but you're fighting against your own body. Well, at some point, you're going to have to win or you will be destroyed. That might be a stretch to say that people in Hawaii, indigenous, are trying to destroy, but it is what it is. I can't say it's right or wrong, whatever. I just know I'm outnumbered. I'm overpowered. And even though you're like, oh, it's not, they're only a small group of people, they know, they understand. The system knows what they're dealing with. They've dealt with non-compliance and activism for at least since the 1960s. Okay? They have advanced psychologists out there that know how you're going to react. DARPA. You're up against DARPA and the CIA and MI5 and MI6. You really think you're going to fucking win? Even your little small ragtag group of people that rushed the White House, you think you're going to win? No, the law is on their side. And so is the machinery. Your little GUNSs are no match against advanced technology. That now you have an idea what's out there and how they're using it. Okay? They never meant this to be under wraps forever. They want you to know what kind of power they have. Because then you'll realize you'll stop resisting, you'll save yourself. Knowledge is power, but if you are in denial and resisting, you don't have enough knowledge or power to save yourself, and you'll take everyone around you down with you. Not everything has to be a fight with the fucking government. Choose your battles wisely, and sometimes, if not all the time, the government was right in their assessment. So choose your battles wisely. Were they right and do what they did to Lahaina? Some will say yes, that did it. Some will say no. Were they ever given a chance to evolve and they chose not to? Did somebody come in there and be like, hey, we want to do this, this, and this? They're like, nope, we don't want to. We don't want to. Here's a petition. There's no change in our area at all. You never know what was initially done to give people a chance to change. And when they didn't want to change, well, okay. But we have to preserve our culture. You can preserve your culture in so many different ways. It doesn't have to be the lifestyle. But again, we're in a new world. And it's been told you through the conspiracy world. We're in a new world. You just didn't know how they're going to force it down your throat. But again, where do humans come up short that don't want to change? Well, because of the wars, because of the antibiotics, because of the surgeries, because of the addictions, because of the violence. That's where humans have gone wrong. How we dealt with conflict, bullies, developing children and animals are so deficient and suffering as they're trying to survive in a changing society. I mean, I can name so many ways why the system is doing what it's doing. And it's kind of like we leave them no choice. If people don't want to change, the change has to happen. Just like with my body, when I'm releasing those demons, and it's fucking painful, like it was the last 3 years, when I'm sitting in my house, in my room, just sitting in all this poop shit that has to be released, and I'm feeling lethargic and headaches and rashes and just dis-ease. I mean, that's the suffering. When the body has to release those demons that have been plaguing me for the last 40-something years. You got to sit with it and release it. Well, the government has been sitting with the suffering. Look at all the psychiatric wards. Look at all the people that are developing babies and then giving them antibiotics on top of that. Giving them to the system, having babies and they don't know what to do with them. So they give them to the system. There's so much suffering out there and it's self-induced. And so at some point the system's going to have to release the demons. But they can't go and convert you. Obviously, you can't convert other people. You've seen it. People are like, oh, don't take a V, take a V. People are like, no, I resist you. And so how do you get people to change? Well, you change their environment. And you make sure they know they're outnumbered. And the system is letting you guys know you're severely outnumbered and outsmarted. So choose your battles wisely. And sometimes, if not all the time, the government was right in their assessment. They've had enough time to study all of you guys and your grandparents and your great-grandparents. They know who's going to resist, who's going to be a problem. They already have you psychologically analyzed. And they already have the reactions and how they're going to manage you right there. And that's through the law, through the justice system, and through force if necessary. But you had to figure out how that was going to impact your world and take personal responsibility for your reactions, literally. Those in the conspiracy world know what's going on and they know what's the intention. They, of all people, know what they need to do to get out of harm's way. But some of you are so fucking stubborn. Some of you might be so conditioned to rebel and to protest and to resist, you can't even save yourself. And you've been marinating in this information for at least 20 years. And you're willing to downplay what's going on as far as Florida. That's what kind of surprised me. This person has been in this information for years. Okay? And yet she downplayed what was going on. She said, oh yeah, the Floridians can handle it. They've been through all this stuff. Okay. That's what I'm saying. Some people are still under the influence. They don't get the reality of what's going on. And you have been marinating in this information for at least 20 years, and you're willing to downplay what's going on. You can't even change to save yourself. You've been so conditioned to resist, so conditioned to be so non-compliant. You don't even know how to apply that logically to your situation at all whatsoever. And of course, you're no help to anyone else, right? Because after all, the government is a bunch of fucking clowns and fools, and you're out there gallivanting, going like, oh, I'm non-compliant, look at me. They got you so fucking radicalized, you cannot even fucking see straight. The world is changing, whether you like it or not. Be the change. And so I appreciate every single fucking one of you on my Facebook. I appreciate some of you who challenge me, because I'll come right back and tell you exactly where I think where you're going and where you are going, because you're proving it. But I don't want to be challenged all the time. It sucks to be challenged by your own friends. I understand challenging on some level, once or twice, or even, but how far do you take it? At some point, just leave it alone. You can't change me. You can't make me stop speaking about how severe these situations are going to be and are. Okay? You got to stop doing that. But I mean, I'd rather people be alarmist than not. I'd rather take everything so dramatically and so to the extreme, because at least when you're taking it to the extreme and it's not that bad according to you, then you're like, okay, it's a win, and I can keep moving on and figure out how to evolve and sidestep all these different things. But when someone just downplays it, that's where I have a problem. I want more drama with also some kind of universal solution that everybody can get around. And so I said 15-foot storm surge. If you're being told to evacuate and go to higher ground, like a safe building, I would suggest you do it. The window is closing very fast. And I don't relish people suffering at all, okay? I don't relish that. I hate seeing people stuck between a rock and a hard place. When that lady was asking people, when she's living in Holiday, Florida, okay? And we don't know if that cone was going to shift or not. And she's taking care of her grandma and wondering whether or not she should leave or not. And we know these storm surges are so insane. It had to get off that page because it was just like, holy shit. I didn't even see, if she survived or not, or I don't even want to know. Because I know a lot of people did not survive those storm surges, because some people stayed back even on that island, whether it was Cedar Keys or Horseshoe Island or whatever that island was. But that was some pretty aggressive, very fast moving water. There are bodies out there floating. There are. And so when they're doing all the sandbags, what kind of castles are you going to build with those sandbags? When storm surges and winds are going to be at an all-time high, do people not realize there is sand at the bottom of the ocean? Traffic will be insane. Go to the government-sanctioned high-rises or cut and run. But I would not be waiting. I would be in some hotel that's been reinforced and already figured out where to be during this time, because you don't know how bad it's going to be. Never gamble with your life, guys. Never. And so so I showed the picture of Fort Myers last year. This is a 15-foot storm surge in Fort Myers last year. Don't have a short memory. This is not something you want to battle or face. Get to a strong bill that's sanctioned by the government. This is what a 10 to 15-foot storm surge looks like. Okay? This was hurricane last year in Fort Myers, Florida. Idalia could bring similar inundation levels to the Big Bend coast of Florida tomorrow. Yeah. And so I did a map, and I showed all of the Gulf of Mexico and all the bordering towns. okay, and even the west coast of Florida. Okay, all of you guys are in the crosshairs. All of you are in the crosshairs for some major crazy shit. Okay, even though Tallahassee was pretty much reinforced, and the mayor or the governor, mayor, whatever, the officials of Tallahassee brought in so many different people to make sure everything was online. Like, they reinforced that whole area. Because that's probably what's going to end up being in the future, is that top part, and Tallahassee is going to be, but everything below Tallahassee on that whole peninsula, you got to know you're going to be sacrificed at some point. You got to know that they don't care where you end up down there. You got to get yourself out of there. That's why I'm like, oh my God. When you see again the future Navy maps, and you know we're in a large scale down, there's so many people in Florida that are expendable. Retirement in the villages, Miami, okay, all up and down the coast. Again, we're so early in the season. And we have till 2030, right? We have, what do you mean, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 7 years. 7 years for them to go and reconfigure everything. 7 years to bring in the smart cities. 7 years. And we're already not even in September, and we have a hurricane that's like a September 10th hurricane. This is where your alarm bells have to go off, guys. Remember the Georgia Guidestones? Georgia Guidestones, maintain humanity under 500 million, smart cities, continents are dividing. I mean, there's a big, huge crack in Africa that's going to let an ocean come through. And they have different technology to do this stuff. Start waking up, paying attention, what's going on. And if you are near bodies of major water, coastlines, even over there up in Lake Erie, Ashtabula, Geneva, and you have these storms coming through, creeping over Lake Erie, coming up from the west down to the southeast. And the bulk of the storms are right there at the water's edge. And people are getting decimated through power outages and tornadoes. Water is going to be, you need water, but then water can be weaponized, and so can the storms. Pay the fuck attention what's going on. And so yeah, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, the coasts, and you all up down South Carolina. When I remember watching the Real Housewives of the South, Southern Charm or whatever, and Thomas Ravenel was one of the stars, and he is a son of some politician, Ravenel City. I'm thinking of, yeah, they're taking out all those traditional Southern people who are very conservative in their ways, inundated with tornadoes and storms. And you're seeing the South and that's where most of the conservatives are in, is Florida. Oh, the southern states. Okay? It's not a coincidence. That's where they have allowed that map to be developed. That's where all the different dividing lines of political thought processes and cultures. And then you knew about the Murdoch case, right? They're out of the South somewhere. Generational conservative people who don't evolve, generational conservative, and they're all in the South. The South will not rise again. The South is fucking sinking. You realize that's what's going on too, from 1860 to 1960, and the left is trying to stop racism. The left is trying to now redevelop people so they become more tolerant, not so violent. Okay, there's a lot of things going on. You have to see that. And so I kind of see that, even though I was trying to look for evidence in the 1960s when Lyndon B. Johnson and the whole Vietnam War, but he's a Democrat. But then, yeah, he's a Democrat, allowing the Vietnam War to happen. And he's always afraid of communism. And that's on top of the Cultural Revolution, even during that time with China, reconfiguring China to become all communist, right? And so when you allow the Vietnam War to happen, and Lyndon Baines Johnson allowed that to happen, and he's a Democrat, then you have the anti-war people Then you have the MLK, and then all the politicians, all the artists and the hippies. And then you have the Charles Mansons and all the different cults, Jonestown and all the Swami cults that were doing the yoga shit. Oh, Lordy. A lot of stuff was going on. Okay? And so you're going to see that now. Yes, people are like so afraid of the left. But remember history. There's a lot of intolerance and racism and all the different isms in the very conservative people. And then, of course, the baby proliferation, the enslavement of women, sexualizing women to such an extent and making them baby makers and making them sexual pieces for the men or other women. Okay? Now you're going to see we're in a huge cultural change. And what was accepted before will be weaponized against you. And that's why we have so many hot girls out there used and are suffering from being so hot. And the men are just predatory around these hot girls. And these hot girls do not have anything more for themselves but their bodies, because their minds are being scrambled by all the attention. Yeah, it's pretty crazy what's going on. And so if you're in any of these southern states, trial by fire and water, I never discount the ability of potential in this scale down. And yeah, if you can finally acknowledge that we're in a scale down, you might be able to save yourself if you can even acknowledge that. And so there's people on my Facebook that I like, and they've been around this information for years, are still resisting. And they still think viruses don't exist. Well, viruses, we all have viruses. We all are a virus. A virus is vital information resource under siege. We may have information and microbes and information and energy that could be deadly to somebody else because they have an issue with evolution, energy, and new information. And so all of us are a virus to somebody else who has maybe an issue with taking on new information in body, mind, and spirit. So viruses are considered as something between living and non-living because they do not grow or reproduce by themselves. This makes them non-living. However, when a virus enters a living cell of an organism, it obtains energy from that host cell and starts reproducing. And that's an idea. Ideas are not living until they get caught by a person who's living and reproducing that information and even evolving it or devolving it. And that's why things go viral. And so this person says the viruses don't exist. Yes, they do exist. A virus just could be information that you have. Like my information about immortality was a virus to people because it conflicted with their belief system. Doesn't mean it was deadly. It could have been to someone who didn't understand because they have to feed the energy, not starve it. But that's the thing. It's how you react to viruses is what will determine your longevity or shortgevity. Okay? And I made that word up. I know it's not real. And so what viruses are, they are vital information resource under siege. They are messenger RNA. They are just data, and they coexist with biodiversity. You never attack viruses because you're attacking yourself, and you never deny their existence, or else you're sticking your head in the sand. You are a type of virus, and you could be deadly to somebody else, or you could be very evolutionary and help somebody else evolve and save themselves. But as you see, those in the activist world, in the anti-V world, anti-government world, anti-whatever world, they will now deny everything that is then perpetrated or said by the government. They will deny everything. They will even deny science in order for their belief system to be justified. And you see that out there. I can't do anything about it. I can only then go and represent where I'm coming from, and they have every right to their belief system. And we still can coexist. And I don't need to convert them. Okay. So then I was going on some of these public pages about that lady that was wondering if she should leave or not, and she had an elderly mother or grandmother that she was taking care of. And so I said, nothing is set in stone when it comes to the cone. Cone can always shift. And outside the cone is also influential. And weather is not so predictable. The way it shifts when the shifts is so unpredictable. Find a way to find higher ground, even if it's a building that is strong enough to withstand the hurricane force winds. What's crazy is people have elderly people they're looking after, and it's a lot of work to move them. And they may not survive the move. I feel for everyone in that situation like that. And so it might be a no-win situation. It's heartbreaking what's going on. But I will remember every single recommendation and observation the weather people and people's experiences are verbalizing, because I might be faced with that over here in Ohio. There are no guarantees any of us will not ever be in this kind of position. I am paying a lot of attention right now. Because remember, we're in climate change. The climate and the weather could change over here like that. I could be faced with a fucking hurricane over here. Is there a place in Ohio, in my town, where we can go where it won't be so, detrimental? I don't know. I would have to figure out what their recommendations would be. I would have to listen to the government, because they know which buildings have been reinforced and which buildings have not been reinforced for certain kinds of winds. And so I'm paying attention a lot right now. This is like the Hunger Games. Pay attention to all the obstacles the system is throwing at you. Pay attention to all the scenarios. Strategize, because we are now in the thick of beginning of the second kickoff of this great reset. Before it was a pandemic, now it's storms, fires, floods, and FEMA. Where will you go when there's high water? Listen to your government, because they will tell you if there's nowhere to really go except for a building that's strong enough to withstand floods and aggressive wind, not including a tornado. Serious. This is a time when you need to listen to your government, because now they have the upper hand when it comes to weather. What buildings are safe, where to go. However, I do not assume that tactical positions won't take advantage of people who do not listen to their government, and they are caught unaware out there. And you never know who or what got to that person. Everyone will assume the storm got to them or whatever else. Don't be caught by yourself. In one of his press conferences, DeSantis said his troops will be using the cover of darkness because there won't be any light to illuminate to save people. So remember, everything was towards the end yesterday. The storm came out, was gone out of Florida sometime in the middle of the day and went to Georgia. And it was still too early to go out there and do search and recovery or whatever, search and rescue. But they probably did it in the cover of darkness at night, looking for people. And you don't know what goes on in the cover of darkness. You don't know what goes on. You do not want to be caught somewhere in the cover of darkness in a chaotic situation. Because remember, over there, even in Lahaina, they said that a certain amount of kids have been missing. Where do they go? Who the hell knows? You don't want to be stuck in that kind of situation where you and the elements and then people with nefarious intentions. Because you never know who takes advantage of chaos. Human traffickers. Okay, you don't know. And so that's why then now you got to listen to your government and go where it's safe, where it's illuminated, where there's light, where there's people. And so in one of his press conferences, DeSantis said his troops will be using the cover of darkness because there won't be any light to illuminate to save people. They'll be using rivers, helicopters, and other places cast in darkness. I'm sure they will have infrared tactical gear. Maybe avoid being in a position to be saved by somebody. And I use the word save very loosely. Play this shit very fucking carefully and smartly. Nothing is off the table now. We are at WAR. Those in the conspiracy world know exactly what I'm talking about, as well you should. And if you don't, you need to be ashamed of yourself, spending that much time in this world and that world, not realize what's going on. There are instances where you want to listen to government and converge in groups because you will not survive on your own, or even in small groups. You need to be around a lot of people in a relatively safe space. But when you're on your own, or even a small pot of people on your own, all bets are off. It's easy to disappear, human trafficking, etc., etc., etc. I'm not trying to scare you, but that's the reality. When kids are caught by themselves and they get kidnapped, they weren't around a lot of people. They weren't even at home. So imagine you by yourself in the middle of all this rising water, and you're stuck on the top of your house, and you're expendable to the government. Anything can fucking happen. If you're a kid by yourself and your family is gone and you're on top of a roof, you don't know what's going to happen. That's what I'm saying. This is some pretty serious shit going on, okay? Don't ever assume you're always safe. You have to be the one to figure out what's going on and sidestep potential pitfalls. All right, now here I'm making a likening to the Vietnam War. Remember the Vietnam War, and you don't know who your enemy is. And it rained constantly, flooding everything. And when there is so much water, fresh water, not so much salt water, but there's so much disease along with high pressure, so much instability. We're in that situation. The military justified their approach in Vietnam in partly by arguing that increasing rainfall to create mud and wash out roads was preferable to more bombing. But the reality is the U.S. military will still drop a lot of bombs on the Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. Over 7 million tons of them. But still, they did increase the rain. And then you saw Forrest Gump during that, one of the segments when he was out there walking in Vietnam and Lieutenant Dan was going like, quiet. And they're going through, and then you hear Bubba Gump going like, I made Gump shrimp and the rain and this and that, All right, so the Vietnam War was just a pre-show, okay? We have been at war since Vietnam. Everybody's back from Afghanistan and Iraq, right, for the most part. We have the National Guard who has been training for this ever since the 90s at least. I was in the National Guard in the military in California. We were doing chemical warfare gear stuff. We had, I was part of the cooking part of it and the mortuary part of it. And we were supporting the unit that was doing the, what is it? What was it called? Maintenance Squadron. And they were putting up shelters and taking them down. They were putting up the camps and taking them down. And then we were part of the mortuary side of it, the MWRS, Morale, Welfare, Recreation Services, doing recreation stuff, planning stuff, cooking stuff, picking up dead bodies. Oh yeah, that was called the Services Squadron back then when I was in the Air National Guard. And then I went to Human Resources. I retook the ASVAB and got a higher score and got into Human Resources, which then gave me the skills to be an admin, of which then I carried into my civilian life. And I was like a secretary and an executive assistant or some kind of admin and learned the computers and learned then how to sell. Okay? And so that's what's going on now. So now you're going to have Maintenance Squadron and not even just maintenance. That was the other one. That was maintenance. And what was the other one? It wasn't just that. That was who I was supporting in the HR or personnel. It was civil. What was called civil engineering. That's who we were supporting when I was in morale. NWRS was civil engineering. So they were doing the civilians, doing all the stuff on the side, and then I supported the maintenance squadron. That's right. That was way back in the 90s. All right. So I had a few years in the military and in different squadrons to understand what they were doing. Whether it was maintenance squadron with all the helicopters and the helicopters like the Black Hawk and the HH-60, the Hueys, baby Hueys or something. And then it was, and then whatever other planes that they were supporting. And then it was also civil engineering. That's what I started out was supporting civil engineering. And I was cooking for everybody. And so everybody's back from the Iraq and Afghanistan, but for the most part, we have the National Guard who's been training for this ever since the 90s at least. We have Black Ops. So much stuff is going on. Play this very smartly. You don't know who the enemy is, and it's not in your White House. And the savior is not in Palm Beach, Florida, or New York. So no, Trump is not going to be your fucking savior, okay? We're in Vietnam. We are allegorically in Vietnam. Because you're also fighting the ignorance out there. People don't even know the danger they're in. No different than an 18-year-old boy not knowing what they were going to face overseas in Vietnam. Right? Remember the Born the 4th of July? And Tom Cruise was all gung-ho to go and support his country. He goes over there and he is just trashed. And he comes back and everyone hates him because they're all radicalized against the war. And he's been, and it's just like, that was such a heart-rending movie. Watch Born on the 4th of July with Tom Cruise. That's what these kids were facing. They're all gung-ho and they come back just a shell of a person. Okay? That's what's going on right now. People are like, not realize what's going on. And they're all gung-ho to go do this or not do this. And then they are faced something that they were not prepared for because they were so gung-ho not to do something. And they're fucked. And the kicker is, the saviors are the most dangerous of all. When you don't know who the enemy is, you'll put your trust in the enemy because they claim to save you. That was Vietnam, walking into booby traps under babies. It's pretty bad right now. If this triggers you from your experiences in Vietnam, please block me. But I cannot help see the correlation. Okay, so medical, holistic, energy, healing world, all the different remedies and surgeries. That's like walking into booby traps under babies. It all looks so, safe and they're so innocent. And they mean well and they're trying to save me from this and that. And you're walking into harm's way when you're getting surgeries, when you're getting chemotherapy and radiation, all that shit. It's like booby traps under babies. People are walking right into their own demise. And that's Vietnam. I mean, hurricane hunting. I wouldn't want to be a storm chaser walking into harm's way, but they get money for it. And we appreciate their sacrifice because it's money when people are watching devastation and death and devastation. And so you'll see a lot of people who are into that. I'll watch it because it's like, it reminds me of what not, I'll tell you, it reminds me of what not to ever do is walk into harm's way voluntarily. And the people who do storm chasing, they walk into harm's way voluntarily. All right, so now let's go back to the 1960s. Now, I was born in 74, came here in 75. I have absolutely no connection to the 1960s, except I was raised by someone who has a connection to the 1960s, and the way they raised me was all about the 1960s. Okay? And so I have a connection with my grandmother, who I met when I was a kid, who is my mom's mom, not like my literal biological, but my adoptive grandmother, who was also raised in the 1920s, 30s, whatever, hundreds. And I met my other grandmother, my dad's side, who was also in the 19-something. So I have an exposure to people way back in the 1900s. All the way up to now, we're in 2023. So I've spanned the generations, spanned all of the patterns of war, and I can now see the patterns of war and how it manifests differently to keep people off kilter, to keep them completely oblivious because of short memories, or their parents just didn't know any fucking better and they were volunteering for things that were harmful. But then when you have hindsight is 2020, history repeats. A rose by any other name is still a rose. A rose by any other name would smell as sweet, meaning we use the phrase a rose by any other name would smell as sweet today to indicate that things are what they are, no matter what name you give them. So yeah, Weather Underground. Okay, so here's an example. Weather Underground. Bob Dylan's song about weathermen, those who were the extreme left that were trying to impose change through specific activities that were aggressive and violent, but did not have the intention to harm a lot of people, but to make a point, make a name. And the FBI was always developing files against people and all that. And so remember the name. Remember, they never intended to hurt people. The Students for a Democratic Society. That's why they chose very specific targets at certain times of the day. Today, the SDS are the weathermen, developing, controlling, and manipulating the weather. And they're giving you plenty of warning. I mean, plenty of warning. Just like they calculated when and where they did those specific activities back in the 1970s. Now you must understand what the intention is. And I'll say this has been in the works since the 1960s and before. Again, you get plenty of warning before the infrastructure is interrupted. And who knows what kind of warning those in Maui got. You don't know if they even didn't get warned. You don't know what kind of warning they were getting. What was introduced to them that they denied or resisted against. You don't know. All you see is the outcome. And then the law about eminent domain. Okay? And you get plenty of warning before infrastructure is interrupted. You must listen to government, especially when they have all the upper hand around the weather. Playing the non-compliance game is going to backfire. Make your choices. No one's going to force you to do anything. But you will pay for your choices, whatever they are. Because there's reasons why they are warning you against certain things. And you won't know what those reasons are until it happens. And you may not ever know the reason because you don't believe it. You think it's a conspiracy theory. Meteorologists are the new weathermen from the 1970s. And there's different levels of awareness, even in the meteorology industry. The rise of storm chasing and amateur meteorologists were for a reason. Nothing is organic. I remember saying, okay, so I was a nanny and I was watching a child who was like 4 years old to like 5 or 6. And his mother she was selling news time or new air time, selling commercial time to people for KGO. And so when I would go and pick up the kid when they were doing exchange, because I don't know, there's some, yeah, and I would drop the kid off to this station so they can go and do their family stuff, and I'd go home and do whatever. I would bring the kid into that station, into KGO in San Francisco. And so I met a few people at KGO, some movers and shakers, but I met Pete Giddings, and he was a meteorologist at the time. He was always on TV, Channel 7, when I grew up. And so when I was there, I'm like, oh my God, it's Pete Giddings, the weatherman. And I said that to the kid that I was watching, and he corrected me and said, no, I'm a meteorologist. I'm not a weatherman. And I'm like, what's the fucking difference? But, but again, he was born in 1939 out of New York. He went to college for meteorology. He was the weatherman or a meteorologist on Channel 7, ABC News, that I watched all the time. Pete Giddings and all those people back then, and I forget the name. I remember, I forget her name, but there's so many people back then I remember. And so I remember saying to one of the kids I was babysitting when we met, KGO TV meteorologist Pete Giddings, San Francisco Bay Area, hey, he's a weatherman. Pete immediately corrected me. I'm a meteorologist. And he was very emphatic with that title. I was slightly taken aback by how aggressive he retorted. But I was a nanny at the time, so I was just the help to be corrected. Now I wonder why, but I know why. Good luck, I said. All right, originally called the Weatherman or Weatherman, a name taken from a line in Bob Dylan's song, The Weather Underground, was a small violent offshoot of Students for a Democratic Society, or SDS, a group created in turbulent 60s to promote social change. Okay, now we have a website called The Weather Underground. Where did that come from, pray tell, right? Weather Underground. Google Weather Underground. It was bought by the Weather Channel, NBC Universal. And so, a brief history, Weather Underground bombings. 3 Weather Underground members were killed when a bomb they had built exploded in the basement of a townhouse in Greenwich Village on March 6, 1970. In the days following the explosion, police found 57 sticks of dynamite, 4 completed bombs, detonators, timing devices, and other bomb-making equipment. 3 Weather Underground members were killed when a bomb they had built exploded in the basement of a townhouse in Greenwich Village. The days following the explosion, police found 57... Okay, I said that already. And then, on January 29, 1975, an explosion rocked the headquarters of the U.S. State Department in Washington, D.C. No one was hurt, but the damage was extensive, impacting 20 offices on the 3 separate floors. Hours later, another bomb was found at a military induction center in Oakland, California, and safely detonated. That's MEPS. I went there to go get processed through their entrance processing station back when I was in the military. A domestic terrorist group called the Weather Underground claimed responsibility for both bombs, originally called the Weathermen, or the Weathermen, a name taken from a line in Bob Dylan's song. The Weather Underground was a small, violent offshoot of Students for a Democratic Society, or SDS, a group created in the turbulent 60s to promote social change. When the SDS collapsed in 1969, the Weather Underground stepped forward, inspired by communist ideologies and embracing violence and crime as a way to protest the Vietnam War, racism, and other left-wing aims. Our intention is to disrupt the empire, to incapacitate it, to put pressure on the cracks, claimed the group 1974 manifesto, Prairie Fire. And then I wasn't surprised when the Ohio Attorney General wanted me to write about my claims and said, well, I don't want a manifesto, just answer the questions. And I'm like, manifesto? What the fuck do they think I am? Oh shit, they think I'm some crazy-ass activist built from the 1960s because I came from California. Holy shit. They thought I was some cult leader. Okay, I get it. Manifesto. Wow. By the next year, the group had claimed credit for 25 bombings, including the U.S. Capitol, the Pentagon, the California Attorney General's office, and the New York City Police Station. The FBI doggedly pursued these terrorists as their attack mounted. Many members were identified, but their small numbers and guerrilla tactics helped them hide under assumed identities. In 1978, the Bureau arrested 5 members who were plotting to bomb a politician's office. Others were captured after 2 policemen and a Brinks driver were murdered in a botched armored car robbery in Nanuet, New York in 1981. See you later, John. Key to disrupting the group for good was newly created FBI New York City Police Anti-Terrorist Task Force. It brought together the strength of both organizations and focused them on these domestic terrorists. The task force and other like it paved the way for today's Joint Terrorism Task Force, created by the Bureau in each of its field offices to fuse federal, state, and local law enforcement and intelligence resources to combat today's terrorist threats. And so now you're seeing people who are against now the left, the right, who are now resisting the left. And just like the left was resisting the conservative right back in the 1960s, the roles have changed. All right? And so by the mid-'80s, the Weather Underground was essentially history. Still, several of these fugitives were able to successfully hide themselves for decades, emerging only in recent years to answer for their crimes. And so, additional information, FBI records of the Weather Underground, from Weather Underground to top 10 fugitives, Bernardine Ray Dorn. You've heard of them maybe through Alex Jones, and then protesting Obama, saying that he was part of the Weather Underground, radicalized back in the 1960s. And I wouldn't assume that's not true. It probably is true. And there's Kathy Boudin, another Weather Underground member. And there's probably so many out there that you don't know that have been able to escape that or have found ways to give back to their country in a different way as a way to, escape justice. You'll never know who they are. You'll know the ones that they want you to know, and there's other ones you don't even know who they are, but they're out there. And they are changing society relative to the intention. Okay, so there is definitely history behind these names. A rose by any other name is still a rose, and it smells just as sweet. So no, they're not called weathermen anymore. They're called meteorologists, and they are reporting on the weather and telling you where to get out of harm's way so you don't end up drowning from 15, 19-foot surges of water. And so we're in water wars when there's too much. There's not enough water. When water is weaponized. All right? Then I post about the Kathy Boudin, the radical life of Kathy Boudin. You can read about that. She was a 1960s Weather Underground activist. And yeah. And so the last 12 years, I've been reporting on the weather through the conspiracy world venue, the chemtrails world, which is probably birthed from the 1960s. I am my mother's daughter. I'm not the one manipulating the weather, but I am reporting on what my predecessors have done. The rule of law, not the rule of the jungle, will govern the conduct of nations. The Rosicrucians will always warn you and tell you what they're going to do, even if they have to use their offspring to do it. While we have the conspiracy theory world on our side, they have plausible deniability and using the DSM, which is the diagnostic manual of diagnosing disease, mental disease, whatever, against what they developed in their offspring as plausible deniability. So when we're dubbing ourselves conspiracy theories and we have relevant and credible information to be a conspiracy theorist, then they go and diagnose us and say that we are looking for attention and we have mental issues. That's their way of redirecting and distracting people from a truth that should be considered on some level. But that's the Rosicrucians. And so I said Gen X was taught to warn people of what their parents were planning. It was our version of helping society and selling whatever was the solution at the time within the laws and parameters. Now look at your MLM people selling you all their herbs and extracts and detoxes and supplements and surgeries and chemotherapy and oncology. Okay? And so I'm not selling any of that shit. I'm selling life and get out of harm's way. And sometimes you need to listen to your government. Other times you can make it a recommendation and choose to opt out. But I'll tell you, Gen X, we were the crapshoot. We were either going to follow in lockstep and be part of the agenda of depopulation, or we were going to, I won't say resist it, but we're going to say, okay, there's a way to live through this if you don't get caught up in the popular solutions to all these perceived problems. And so somebody said in a Florida meme, when does Walmart open up so you can return 20 packs of water, asking for a friend? And then someone responded, that's why I never buy anything for a hurricane here in Florida, because it gets all talked up and everyone thinks it's the end of the world. I've been through every hurricane since I was born here in Florida, and my family has never panicked, bought even whatever. And like, hey, okay, so you've been around hurricanes for the last 20 years or whatever it is. Well, we'll see how frequent they'll become. It may take, we might have another one in a couple weeks. You never fucking know. They just pop up out of nowhere. It's not that difficult when you know how it's going to be hot next week. Right now it's kind of cool. We're at 50-something degrees. And it'll be like a high of 71. Next week it's going to be 91. Next week it's going to be 91. Next week. That's how vast this climate change is. And so then when you have so much heat, it heats up the waters yet again. And then let's say in a couple weeks, another hurricane all of a sudden comes out of Cape Verde over there near Africa and works its way over into the Atlantic and then potentially even the Gulf Coast. Okay? So don't ever get comfortable because you survived the last 20 of them. I would rather assume now every fucking hurricane is going to be detrimental and you have a game plan. Not only supplies and resources, but also to get the hell out of harm's way, especially if you're near water. And so I don't want anyone getting too comfortable now. But you can if you want, but then it sucks to watch you suffer when you have nowhere to go. And so, yeah, I said weather terror. And so when I showed the picture or the video of AccuWeather videos of the storm, just the waves, the surging of water just lap aggressively at some of these buildings. This is the full weight and force of not only the American government, but the New World Order. You can't offend them. You can only defend yourself. This is why you need to question everything, even how you defend yourself, because what you think is offending the government is actually offending yourself. Play everything extremely smart. Everything we experienced the last 24 hours was a huge indicator. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. Just learn from these experiences. Don't get too comfortable around anything. It's still very, very early in the hurricane season. It doesn't end until November 30th. Expect the unexpected. And even then, it could go beyond November 30th. You never know. We're in climate change. We're in global warming. Okay? All right, now we get into the legal side of everything. Now you understand what George Bush meant by this is the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, that will govern the conduct of nations. Okay, the rule of law. I understand the laws of everything, not even just biology, laws of life and death, but also laws of your society. And then, there's plausible deniability. There's secret operations, secret ops, things that go on that you don't know. We have space wars. We have GPS wars. We have so many different kind of wars out there. And machinery. We have CERN for research and HARP for research. We have chemtrails as far as research. We have so much research projects going on. You have no idea of the intentions. You have no idea, anything. So you can only speculate. So things don't have to be completely catastrophic for the government to take it if it's deemed hazardous and unlivable. What is it? Land. The government wants to bring back biodiversity. They want to move people off different areas that are way out there in the middle of nowhere. And you could be in one little small house in the middle of nowhere. And when your little house is taken out by a tornado or a fire or a flood, and areas have been untouched or storms have fizzled out right around these areas, then you're going to realize that maybe the safest place as far as weather-wise is going into a more of a human habitation zone versus way out there in the middle of nowhere. And so that's what I mean by you don't have to be completely catastrophic for the government to take your land if it's deemed hazardous and unlivable because of Mother Nature. What's excluded? Factories and cemeteries and gardens and orchards. Okay? Well, you need the garden. Well, they won't take a garden or an orchard because you can't recreate that. All right? So that won't be taken by the government. But homes, people's ancestral home, people's homes, their land, their farms, yeah. Everything else is up for grabs. One of the grounds that a government may use to take property is that the property is a hazard to a member of the community. When land or property is dangerous, then a government may condemn it and take it from its owner. Condemnation is a form of eminent domain. Now look what happened in Lahaina. You can speculate where it came from. People do. You can't prove it. You can't prove where that information came from. You can't prove that even Oprah and whoever else on the island was in cahoots with whoever was doing whatever with the weather. You can't prove anything. And so the outcome is hazardous. The outcome is it's unlivable. And the government and or someone will buy it up and the government will condemn it and take it back to the public domain. A more familiar basis that a government may use to take land is public good. Eminent domain claims often move forward based on the need of a government to secure private land for the benefit of everyone. There are certain types of property, however, that generally may not be taken through eminent domain for any purpose. One of those property types is cemeteries, which cannot be generally be moved or relocated. Another property type that cannot be taken is gardens or orchards, since those agricultural uses often take time to become profitable and cannot be easily recreated. Finally, factories are often left out of eminent domain taking, although if they become hazardous, it is possible government may seek to take and close them. For more information about eminent domain should be sought from real estate attorneys. Okay? So it means if you have a house and you're paying taxes or whatever the hell, whether it's in your family for years, centuries, or just the last 20 years, it's subject to be taken if the government deems it to be something that it needs to be for whatever reason. And it may be from the outcome of a natural disaster. Natural disaster. All right? So, yeah, people in Lahaina, they have no leg to stand on. They have none. They can try, but they're part of eminent domain. They pay taxes for that. Lahaina, eminent domain. And it sucks, but remember the rule of law that will govern the conduct of nations. And so I said it's not illegal or a conspiracy theory when all situations have legal remedies around it. And so if there is a natural disaster, whether it's a fire, wind, rain, storm, whatever, and then there's complete devastation, or like the waters that are churning up so much crap and they're saying get out of the water, and then everything's devastated. They're like, okay, well, you can't rebuild here. You can't rebuild here because of this, this, and this, and this. And they rebuild somewhere else. They move people somewhere else. That's how they're going to move people, is through eminent domain after the natural disasters. And so what countries have eminent domain? The eminent domain comes from the Fifth Amendments of the Constitution. Most common law nations follow a similar rule. It is called compulsory acquisition. In New Zealand, in the UK, and Australia, in Canada, it's called expropriation. And in Ireland, it is known as compulsory purchase. Okay? And so, yeah. Think of the Canadian wildfires. And everyone's getting moved away from those wildfires. I said, don't get too comfortable. And there's direct energy weapons. And then, what did I say? All right. I said, if you do not value yourself, the government will assume you are expendable. Okay, so imagine when you're being told, okay, there is fires, there's rain, there's hurricanes, there's wind, there's floods, get the hell out because you will die if you do not get out. And you choose not to move, you choose not to evacuate. Then you are telling people your life is expendable, you do not value your life, and the government will not value your life. Okay? When you do not move out of harm's way, and flood waters is harm's way, fire is harm's way, hazardous materials that are in your water, in your air, in your area that was told that is unlivable, uninhabitable, and you stay there, you are saying that you do not value your life. Imagine all the different ways how the scale down will take place. Fire, wind, rain, earth, all being used as a weapon against the people. Then think about your immune system under attack from your prescription drugs, from using natural remedies, from using hot pepper, cayenne pepper, and jalapenos. Imagine using laser weapons against your body like the Rife machines and laser surgery. Imagine all the different concoctions made of water people are selling on the internet. Extremely activated water, using extreme high heat against the body like saunas. Radiation, chemotherapy, using essential oil aromatics, no different than what you perceive as poison called chemtrails. And then you're on your diet, starving yourself out, starving your children out. Some areas in the world are not getting food at all, death by starvation. And you have the issue with the New World Order when everything you perceive they're doing to you, you've already done to yourself and accepted it. And so if you don't value your life and your children's lives, and you don't get out of harm's way, and you're always giving yourself and your children and everything to the medical, holistic, energy healing world, you're telling the system you don't value your life, you don't value your children's lives, and your life is expendable to be used as a tool, as an example, and as a science experiment. And so now, if you really value your life, it will happen at the micro level, and then you will listen to your government when they say time to evacuate. And so this is very strategic on their end. This is how you wage war. What happened in World War II is not how you wage war. That's just genocide. This is giving people the choice, and then showing the government and their people and the people what you think of yourself by how you take care of your symptoms, and when to move and when not to move and all that stuff. Now we get to see all over Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and TikTok how people do not value their life, and how people actually do value their life. That's fucking genius. Bye.